Hello, I'm Frank Mitchell with A Shining City on a Hill.org. We're doing a series here on the end times in Scripture and how the end times are clearly playing themselves out as outlined in chapter 17 of Revelation, chapter 2 of 2 Thessalonians, and the 11th chapter of Daniel. And we've looked at specific figures in American politics and in world history, both religious and political leaders, and analyzed them. In the last three programs, we did first Jimmy Carter, who's the big turning point in American politics with his Gnostic Christianity applied to politics. Then we looked at Barack Obama and his black liberation theology apostasy applied to politics. And each of them goes before the church and sells it there as true messianic figures. And then finally we looked in the last program at Hillary Clinton and what she has is in essence a New Age Christianity based on a Luciferian, you shall be as gods. New Age Christianity is much more corrupt, spiritually speaking, than simply black liberation theology or simple Gnosticism. Okay. We want to move on today and look at the Bush presidencies in relationship to this bigger picture, how they fit into it, and how Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump fit into it. Nothing complicated here. The Bushes, George Herbert Walker Bush Sr., at the end of the Cold War, went to the United Nations, I think it was 1990, and gave his famous New World Order speech, which was a globalism speech that is the same globalism that the left is promoting, which is a variation on it. It's not the exact same, but it's a variation on the globalism of Agenda 21 to Agenda 2030. He starts the process, and he does that because the Cold War had ended. And when the Cold War ended, the world was divided into three camps: pro-Soviet, anti-Soviet, free world, and the non-aligned or third world countries. And usually they would usually be the non-developed countries. They tend to be lumped together there. Okay, so when the Cold War ends, that dynamic for the world ends, and George Herbert Walker Bush has a problem on his hands as the leader of America and the free world, which has just won the Cold War, because the whole Soviet communism had collapsed as a viable ideology for any country and its economics. Well, what happens? He has to go to the United Nations and say, okay, it's a new day. We got to start over with some kind of a new world order to replace the old Cold War world order, right? And he comes up with his vision for the world that was based on humanism and on non-traditional concepts of justice, not social justice, but crony capitalism, and non-free sovereign states based under globalistic authority, and non-traditional morality or righteousness. In essence, all of those are lawlessness. But the fact is, the Bush Sr. and W. Bush, his son, were not personally men of lawlessness. They were not apostate Christians. They were traditional Christians. So they are not part of the great apostasy, and they are not personally in their Christianity embracing a lawless Christianity. So they don't fit for being a typology of the person who goes into the temple selling themselves as a false messianic leader with their false Christianity applied to politics, whether it's agape love as lawlessness as Carter, black liberation theology and its social justice as Obama, or Hillary Clinton's radical Saul Alinsky New Age Christianity and its social justice. Saul Alinsky and his politics and New Age and its Christianity, those go together. Okay. There are whole churches that give New Age sermons all the time. You can get them on the internet, and they are getting in touch with the fact that you're God and higher spiritual forces and all kinds of stuff, way beyond simple Christian Gnosticism. Very common in the churches today. And Hillary even had this is more connected with the end time one world religion, that all religions are doing the same thing, and it's getting in touch with this higher spirituality of everything. That's being developed specifically by Pope Francis and the Methodist minister that gave his prayer at the Democrat National Convention. Okay, but the point is that the Bushes, neither Bush Sr. or Bush W. Bush Jr., neither one of them are New Age Christianity. They're not Gnostic Christianity. They are sin and salvation, clear Orthodox Christians. And W. Bush is an actual overt evangelical. His father is not an evangelical so much as a traditional Christian. But they don't realize that the New World Order agenda that they are promoting is at odds with traditional Christianity, traditional theories of government, and traditional liberty and justice for all of America, a shining city on a hill, based on one God, one nation under God. Okay, they don't realize that. When you're doing what Ronald Reagan did, and ultimately what Donald Trump's going to do, you're doing one nation under God, traditionally defined, not another Jesus, not another gospel, not another God with no law, as Marcion and Carter. One God, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all, everybody. That's the common good, or the Commonwealth. That's why it's called a Commonwealth. If you have a nationalist populism or a democracy or a republic that is not a Commonwealth, the classical authors of antiquity would say that's not a true Commonwealth. It's not a true republic. The true republic is a Commonwealth. But you can have a Commonwealth even if you have a monarchy, if your monarchy is under the laws of nature, nature's God, with equal rights for all. Today, Great Britain is a monarchy, but it's a constitutional monarchy, or in essence, it is liberty and justice for all, and with Christ is the king of the king, right? The king of the queen, the Lord of the lords. So you don't have to get rid of the king in order to have a constitutional monarchy. Same thing happened in the Old Testament. Old Testament Israel was a republic, didn't have a king. They wanted a king. God said, okay, you can have a king. But if you have a king, he has to be under the moral law, and he has to keep a notebook to make sure he keeps my law, the moral law, and he's under the law. That makes for a just republic, a just monarchy. It's a constitutional monarchy with rights for people. Now, the Old Testament law didn't work out rights in the way that we do in a modern sense. That comes later in history. But it's the same adaptation of rights for the cultures and societies of the time. The concept of equal rights that we have comes more out of the Stoics and the Roman Republic, where it becomes general rights of citizenship that are the same for everybody. But even in the Old Testament law, everybody had rights. But they had rights given what your station was, okay, as opposed to general rights of citizenship. But that's the details of working out the deep weeds of all this. The bottom line point is that the Bushes were not promoting traditional concepts of liberty and justice for all, but new concepts of globalism based on atheism, and not on liberty and justice for all, but on statism and social justice, the same way the Democrats are. So they're actually they're fine Christian men carrying the water for the globalist humanist agenda unconsciously. I'm completely convinced that neither one of them were aware of the fact they were doing this. That's my personal opinion. So they are not championing the radical positions of everyone of the left, of the classic false Christ counterfeit of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Okay, but Reagan, when he ran against Carter's Gnostic Christianity, agape love is lawlessness for the individual and the state, placing America's interests last. Is what Carter says you're supposed to do if you're doing agape love is lawlessness. And it has an agape love is lawlessness social justice. So that's what Carter wants to do. Reagan runs against him, overtly proclaiming a shining city on a hill, which is a terminology for the kingdom of God come on earth that the American founders advocated, and that a shining city on a hill is government of the people, by the people, for the people, commonwealth, and it does liberty and justice for all, or equal rights for all, as outlined in the Declaration of Independence based on the higher moral law of laws of nature, nature's God. You do justice, that's what's good for everybody, not for special interest groups, for the general welfare, that's the common good, in wise discernment by the legislator. And that creates a harmonious interaction of all the parts of the body of the Commonwealth. That's classical Greek philosophy and Greek and Roman philosophy of Cicero, and prior to that, to a degree, Aristotle and Plato. So these concepts become part of the American founding vision. Liberty and justice for all is under God, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Reagan runs on that specifically versus Carter's social justice, Gnostic Christianity, agape love is lawlessness, which doesn't have liberty and justice for all. It has statism, and it has social justice, wealth redistribution is the point of the state, and social wealth redistribution in itself as the point of the state is an injustice, because you don't get the fruits of your own labor, somebody else does, and it's the job of a Leviathan beast state to take the fruits of your labor and hand them out as it sees fit. That's a false theory. That's a counterfeit kingdom vision, which Reagan runs against. Carter insults the entire Christian community with his 1978 speech on all this Gnostic Christianity is true Christianity, and he lectures them and tells them that they need to set the state up based on all this baloney. And they are shocked. Not only do they want Christians wind up voting against Carter en masse, and he becomes very bitter about this. He feels the Christians have deserted him in his book. But they vote for Reagan because he's doing a classical vision of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, the shining city on the hill. Okay, now, fast forward to Donald Trump. He's running against Hillary Clinton, and he's running on law and order and free sovereign states that are not under globalism. Okay, so he's anti-globalism, anti the Leviathan beast state, just like the saints are in the army of Christ in Revelation 17, and he's for law and order. Now, on the surface, law and order doesn't seem like a big thing to say, but in reality, it's liberty and justice for all. Trump is running on liberty and justice for all, which is of a shining city on a hill, the same way Reagan did. But he doesn't call it liberty and justice for all. Donald Trump, for whatever his reasons, calls it law and order. What is law and order? Law and order is moral law. Moral law for the state is justice. Moral law for the individual is righteousness. He's running on, we need to have the country based on law and order. Order is ordered liberty for the harmonious interaction of the parts of the body, which is classic justice. If you have unordered liberty, that's license. License is lawlessness. Unordered liberty is anarchy. It's hedonism. It's radical libertarianism. The radical libertarian that doesn't believe in the state doesn't believe in ordered liberty. They believe in unordered liberty. That's the whole point of being radical individualism is unrestrained by the state, by just laws to confine or constrain people's activities to ordered liberty, not exploiting each other. So if Donald Trump says law and order, in reality, that is an advocacy of liberty and justice for all. Law and order and government of, by, and for the people, as Lincoln said. That's nationalist populism that creates a commonwealth and not nationalist populism that creates a demagoguery, not exploitation. The reason why the ancients didn't like democracy is that you tend to have a demagogue who sets up the people to exploit the mass of the people to exploit other parts of the society and the upper classes, that sort of thing. Okay, so you have an overt liberty and justice for all in Trump's law and order. Moral law, justice, and ordered liberty is liberty and justice for all, good for all. At the same time, Hillary Clinton is giving the same speech that she gave in a college, which is Saul Alinsky's haves to have-nots economic theory. There is no such theory as trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics is saying the point of government is to redistribute wealth, and it's not to trickle the wealth down, it's to reappropriate the wealth in massive amounts from the haves to the have-nots in social justice of a neo-Marxism of Saul Alinsky. And she does this all in terms of her New Age Christianity of a one-world religious government endorsing this in this whole globalist agenda. She's taking Barack Obama to a higher level. And then we also saw that if you include in all of the stuff that Hillary Obama and Carter are advocating as lawlessness and government based on the lawlessness in Christianity, if you add and social justice as a false law, but if you add in the Daniel passages of chapter 11, you're going to get things that clearly could be a reference to Islam, and that is in the abuse of women, disregard for the rights of women, and in honoring, not worshiping, but honoring the god of the forces or of military might, or of, you could say, of the sword. The god of war in ancient antiquity was the god of Mars, but Mars isn't around today. The only god of war that's currently around these days is going to be Allah. So you're honoring Allah, and you're also, but if you're honoring the classic god of war in classical Islam, that's radical Islam, which is abuser of women, as we see in the strict Muslim countries even of today. Even though they're not practicing violent jihad, they are radical in the sense that they are doing a strict application of Sharia law, which is very abusive of women, and that Islam is being championed by, for whatever the reasons, by Obama and Hillary. Not good, but that's just what we have to deal with reality. And Trump is saying, no, we have to weed out radicals if we're going to have Muslims come in. We have to decide who's a radical, who isn't. And that's considered to be anti-Islam, because you don't weed people out. You have to accept all Muslims or no Muslims. It's just a very confused set of thinking that the left is doing in relationship to radical Islam, and where radical Islam begins and where it doesn't, and they don't even admit that it exists, let alone that it exists and that it's an evil. Okay. So all this stuff is the same themes playing out in variations in the specifics of these prophecies. So next time we're going to look at what the New World Order is in relationship, I hope to anyway, in relationship to the founding of America as a shining city on a hill, and what that means. It's a very interesting story that most people don't know, and I'll try to give it to you as best I know it. So see you next time.